My name is Helen Stephen, and I am 34 years old. Last month, I sat in the shadows of the Grand Astor Hotel ballroom and watched my mother erase my existence. I was assigned to table 14, tucked away near the swinging kitchen doors where the waitstaff rushed past with heavy trays of roasted filet mignon. I was not formally invited to my parents' 30th wedding anniversary. I secured my seat by virtue of paying the catering invoice. On stage, under the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, my mother Victoria wore a custom emerald gown. She held a flute of vintage champagne and leaned into the microphone. Her voice echoed off the gilded ceiling. She thanked the 200 elite guests for attending. Then, she placed her free hand over her heart and gestured to the young woman standing beside her. She introduced my sister Chloe as their beautiful, only child, the sole light of their lives. 200 people erupted into applause. They raised their glasses to the perfect, wealthy, tight-knit family. I sat in the dim lighting of table 14 and felt the final frayed thread holding me to my blood relatives snap. I did not cry. I did not storm out. I took a slow sip of sparkling water. The citrus stung the back of my throat. The hired MC stepped up to the podium and asked the crowd if anyone else had a few words to share. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the marble floor. Before I tell you exactly what I said into that microphone and how I triggered a systemic financial collapse for the people on that stage, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Sophia Told Stories. But only do so if you genuinely connect with stories about setting firm boundaries. Drop a comment telling me your age and where you are watching from right now. Now let us walk back into that ballroom. The ambient chatter of the room was a steady hum. The string quartet in the corner played a soft classical arrangement. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored charcoal suit and stepped away from the shadows of table 14. I did not hurry. I walked down the center aisle with the deliberate, measured stride of an executive entering a boardroom. My heels clicked a sharp rhythm against the polished stone. One by one, the guests at the outer tables turned their heads. Conversations faded into a strained hush. The cellist in the string quartet noticed me approaching the stage. His bow slowed, dragging a harsh note across the strings before the music stopped. The sudden silence in a room of 200 people carries a physical weight. My father, Thomas, stood near the center floral arrangement. His tailored tuxedo jacket tightened across his shoulders as he recognized me. His smile did not fade, it fractured. My mother lowered her champagne glass. Her knuckles turned white around the delicate crystal stem. Chloe stood between them, adjusting her designer silk dress, her brow furrowing in genuine confusion. They spent the last decade curating an illusion of effortless generational wealth and burying the daughter who did not fit their aesthetic. They expected me to stay hidden. They assumed I would absorb the disrespect in exchange for a seat in the back of the room. I reached the edge of the stage. The MC, a young man in a rented suit, looked unsure of protocol. He held the microphone stand. I did not ask for permission. I stepped onto the platform, walked directly to the center, and wrapped my fingers around the cold metal of the microphone. The metal grill of the microphone felt freezing against my palm. I adjusted the stand down 2 inches. The audio feedback whined for a fraction of a second before the sound engineer muted the interference. 200 faces stared back at me. I recognized local politicians, charity board members, and real estate developers sitting at the premier tables near the front. These were individuals who valued pedigree over character, people who traded social currency like stocks. The air inside the ballroom smelled of expensive floral centerpieces and roasted meat, yet it suddenly felt incredibly stale. My mother stood 3 feet away. Her custom emerald gown caught the chandelier light, but her posture turned rigid. My father shifted his weight, his jaw clenching so tight the muscle twitched beneath his skin. He shot a frantic glance toward the venue manager standing near the emergency exit, silently demanding someone cut my audio feed. I did not afford them the opportunity to intervene. "Good evening," I stated. My voice carried a steady, even cadence. It was the exact pitch I utilized during corporate compliance audits, designed to project unyielding authority. For those of you whispering at table 4, trying to place my features, allow me to introduce myself. I am Helen Stephen. I am the ghost of this family. A collective intake of breath rippled through the front row. Chloe took a sudden step backward, her designer silk dress brushing against a towering floral arrangement. My mother just stood on this stage and told you she had an only child, I continued, keeping my gaze locked on the crowd. It is a highly convenient narrative. I was erased from their public archives 19 years ago. At 15, I preferred reading advanced calculus and economic theory over attending cotillion practice. I possessed a quiet academic nature that did not align with the curated country club aesthetic my parents required for their social climbing. So, they outsourced my upbringing. They shipped me to a strict boarding school in New Hampshire, visiting only when legally obligated by school administration. I let the weight of that reality settle over the room. The silence grew thick and suffocating. Guests set their silver forks down. Nobody dared to take a sip of their drinks. But I did not step up here to litigate childhood grievances, I declared, shifting my stance slightly to address the room at large. I am here to offer a proper anniversary toast. 30 years of marriage is a significant milestone. Maintaining an illusion of this magnitude requires extreme dedication, ruthless networking, and above all, exceptional funding. I turned my head just enough to meet my father's eyes. Thomas swallowed hard. He recognized that a disaster was unfolding, yet his inherent arrogance prevented him from anticipating the angle of my strike. For the past 5 years, Thomas and Victoria have maintained their beautiful estate in Greenwich, I explained to the captivated audience. They have hosted lavish charity galas and funded my sister's various wellness startup ventures. They attribute this sustained lifestyle to a grandfathered trust payout managed by an obscure holding company called the Vanguard Sterling Group. I looked back out at the audience, making deliberate eye contact with a prominent judge who frequently golfed with my father. The Vanguard Sterling Group is not a legacy trust. It is a private corporate LLC that I registered half a decade ago. I serve as the sole managing director. The color drained from my mother's cheeks, leaving her carefully applied makeup looking harsh and unnatural. Her manicured hand began to tremble, causing the champagne inside her glass to sway. I kept my delivery clinical and precise, refusing to inject any petty emotion into the execution. My heart rate remained perfectly steady. I felt no surge of adrenaline, no messy emotional catharsis. I only felt the cold, satisfying logic of a balanced ledger. When my father's boutique logistics firm faced quiet insolvency 5 years ago, I stepped in, I revealed. My daily profession involves forensic accounting. I dissect failing companies, tracking every hidden debt and poorly managed asset. I watched his shipping contracts dry up. I saw his credit lines max out. I knew he was weeks away from losing the Greenwich property. I did not intervene out of filial loyalty or some desperate need for their affection. I intervened because I required a complex tax liability offset for my own expanding corporate portfolio. The room remained motionless as I laid out the financial architecture of their lives. For 60 consecutive months, I have authorized a $12,000 retainer to cover their residential mortgage, their elite club dues, and the catering deposits for events exactly like this one, I stated. My accounting firm executed the transfers through a series of shell accounts, ensuring my name never appeared on their monthly statements. They assumed they were untouchable. They were simply unaware of their landlord. The wealthy guests sitting at the premier tables began to shift uncomfortably. The pristine facade of the Stephen family dynasty disintegrated in real time under the bright ballroom lights. High society circles harbor a deep, primal disgust for fabricated wealth. I watched a prominent real estate developer fold his napkin and actively avoid my parents' gaze. Chloe let out a sharp, panicked breath. The realization crashed into her with devastating force. She understood in that precise moment that the designer shoes on her feet and the luxury downtown apartment she leased were directly subsidized by the sibling she pretended did not exist. Her entire identity as a self-made influencer was built on a foundation of my corporate capital. "Tonight is a celebration of truths," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere. "And the truth is, a ghost cannot sign checks." Effective at midnight tonight, the Vanguard Sterling Group is permanently dissolving the residential retainer. The monthly disbursements are terminated. I will not be renewing the contract that is currently financing the roasted filet mignon sitting on your plates. I turned back toward my mother. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and profound disbelief. She constructed her entire existence around the perception of financial superiority. I just broadcasted her impending bankruptcy to her entire social network. She possessed no high ground, no counter-argument, and no remaining funds. I detached the microphone from the stand. The young MC stood paralyzed a few feet away, clutching his clipboard against his chest like a protective shield. I held the cold metal device out to him. He blinked rapidly and took it from my hand without uttering a single syllable. I did not look back at my parents. I did not grant my sister the satisfaction of a final dramatic glare. I simply turned my back to the stage and walked down the center aisle. The bewildered guests parted seamlessly, creating a wide, unobstructed path toward the exit. The silence followed me, heavy and absolute. As I reached the midpoint of the ballroom, a sharp, crystalline crack echoed through the venue. Victoria's vintage champagne flute slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered against the polished wooden stage. The sound was crisp and final, the perfect acoustic punctuation mark to end a 3-decade performance. The shards of glass scattered across the floorboards, reflecting the chandelier light like broken diamonds. I pushed through the heavy oak doors and stepped into the cool, damp night air of Manhattan. The ambient noise of the city traffic rushed in to replace the suffocating quiet of the hotel. The valet brought my car around to the curb. Before I even unlocked the driver's side door, the device in my tailored pocket began to vibrate. The screen illuminated with my father's name. The social shock was concluding. The sheer financial panic was initiating, and by tomorrow morning, the automated banking algorithms would finish the systemic purge I just started. The drive from the Grand Astor Hotel to my penthouse took 22 minutes. I sat behind the steering wheel of my sedan and watched the blur of city streetlights wash over the dashboard. The silence inside the cabin felt vast and clean. My phone rested in the center console. The screen illuminated every few seconds, signaling a relentless stream of incoming notifications. I did not reach for the device. I allowed the digital panic to accumulate in the dark. I pulled into the secure underground parking garage of my building. The concrete walls offered a stark contrast to the gilded ballroom I had just dismantled. I rode the private elevator up to the top floor. When the steel doors slid open, I stepped into my foyer. The air inside my home smelled of cedar and rain. Lucas sat at the kitchen island. He held a ceramic mug of tea and reviewed a set of architectural blueprints spread across the quartz countertop. He looked up as I entered. He did not ask how the anniversary party went. He simply closed his folder, walked over, and took my coat. He served as my quiet fortress, a partner who understood that some battles required an audience of none. I walked into my home office and placed my phone onto the glass desk. The device felt warm to the touch from continuous battery drain. I tapped the screen to view the log. There were 84 missed calls. All of them originated from Thomas. The text messages accompanied the missed calls in a frantic, escalating sequence. The initial texts reflected pure denial. He demanded I return to the hotel and explain my tasteless prank to his colleagues. An hour later, the tone shifted toward rage. He threatened to involve his legal team to enforce the terms of the Vanguard Sterling Group Trust. By the time I reached my apartment, the messages degraded into desperate pleas for a private meeting. He wanted to negotiate. He assumed the financial faucet could be turned back on with a superficial apology and a cup of coffee. I ignored every single message. I opened my encrypted laptop and authenticated my corporate credentials. The glow of the monitor illuminated the dark room. As I navigated to the wealth management portal, my mind drifted back to a specific afternoon 19 years ago. I was 15 years old, standing in the foyer of our Greenwich estate. A renowned portrait photographer was setting up lighting umbrellas in the formal living room. My mother had ordered custom silk outfits for the occasion. When I walked downstairs wearing my assigned dress, she let out a sharp sigh of disappointment. She adjusted my collar and muttered that my awkward posture and plain features ruined the visual symmetry of the family. 10 minutes later, she sent me back to my room. I listened to the photographer direct Thomas, Victoria, and Chloe through a series of flawless, radiant poses. That was the exact moment I understood the currency of the Stephen household. Aesthetics dictated value. 2 months later, they enrolled me in a boarding school 3 states away. They framed the decision as a prestigious educational opportunity. In reality, they purchased a very expensive closet to hide the daughter who did not match their social branding. I spent my 20s honoring their unspoken arrangement. While Chloe bounced between expensive wellness retreats and failed influencer campaigns funded by my father, I stayed in the library. I studied tax law, forensic accounting, and corporate compliance. I built a career dissecting the failures of mismanaged companies. I learned how to track every hidden liability and identify the exact moment a business model became unsustainable. My parents viewed money as a prop to buy admiration. I learned to view money as a system of leverage and consequence. I pulled up the master ledger for the Vanguard Sterling Group. The interface displayed the active routing numbers connecting my corporate accounts to my parents' residential and social expenses. The architecture of their false reality sat right there on the screen. It took exactly 4 keystrokes to initiate the dissolution protocol. I drafted a brief, uncompromising directive to my wealth management team. The instructions mandated an immediate freeze on all outbound transfers, the termination of the blind LLC, and the closure of the associated credit lines. I authorized the digital signature and hit send. The system confirmed receipt. The financial umbilical cord was officially severed. I closed the laptop and walked back into the living room. Lucas handed me a fresh glass of water. We stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows and watched the city skyline glitter against the night sky. I slept an unbroken 8 hours. Tuesday morning arrived with a crisp, logical certainty. I woke up, dressed in a tailored navy suit, and prepared an espresso. The grinding of the coffee beans provided a steady, grounding noise. At precisely 8 o'clock, my phone chimed with a scheduled push notification from the automated banking monitor. I picked up the device and read the brief text on the screen. Direct debit failed, insufficient funds. The notification confirmed that the monthly automated payment for the elite Connecticut Country Club had bounced. The Vanguard Sterling account was locked, meaning the billing software attempted to pull the funds directly from my father's primary checking account. His account lacked the necessary capital to cover the transaction. The digital cascade was officially underway. I imagined the sequence of events unfolding across the city. Thomas would be sitting in his favorite upscale diner, attempting to pay for a business breakfast. He would hand his platinum card to the server, expecting the usual deferential nod. Instead, the server would return with a declined receipt. Thomas would pull a secondary card from his leather wallet, only to face the same humiliating rejection. He would step outside to call his private banker, his voice tight with rising panic, demanding to know why his legacy trust was malfunctioning. The banker would gently inform him that the Vanguard Sterling Group was not a legacy trust, but a corporate entity that had formally revoked his access to their capital. The realization would crush him. He would finally understand that the ghost he discarded was the only entity keeping a roof over his head. The sudden financial vacuum would not just devastate my parents. The consequences would instantly travel down the family tree to the golden child. Chloe leased her luxury downtown condo and funded her fabricated influencer lifestyle using supplemental cards linked to Thomas. With those accounts abruptly frozen, her incoming cash flow dropped to zero overnight. She possessed no actual savings and generated no legitimate revenue. Her entire brand relied on projecting an image of effortless prosperity to her followers. Facing imminent default on her own exorbitant expenses, Chloe would scramble to secure a new source of capital. She could no longer rely on her parents to subsidize her illusions. She would need to seek outside funding to keep her failing wellness startup afloat. She would dust off her exaggerated business plans and attempt to pitch her way into a substantial bridge loan. She would walk into a venture capital firm expecting her charm and fabricated metrics to secure the money she desperately required. She had no idea that the compliance officer assigned to audit her specific loan application would be the exact same woman who just burned her family dynasty to the ground. The financial drought reached my sister within 48 hours. Chloe leased a sprawling loft in Tribeca, curating a digital aesthetic built entirely on perceived exclusivity and limitless disposable income. She operated a luxury wellness brand named Lumina Botanicals. The company produced a line of overpriced essential oil serums and minimalist skincare routines, functioning more as a vanity project than a viable enterprise. Tomas had quietly absorbed her quarterly operating losses for 3 years. With his platinum cards now declining across the eastern seaboard, Chloe faced an immediate liquidity crisis. She required a substantial bridge loan to maintain her fabricated lifestyle. The target sum was $150,000. She set her sights on a boutique venture capital syndicate in Manhattan, known for funding female-led lifestyle startups. Chloe walked into their glass-walled conference room armed with a sleek presentation deck. She projected unwavering confidence, relying on the same superficial charm our parents nurtured since our childhood. Growing up, if Chloe brought home a failing grade, Victoria would schedule a meeting with the principal to complain about the curriculum structure. When Chloe was 17, she entered a regional science fair. She copied an entire collegiate research paper, submitted it as her own work, and won first place. When the school administration discovered the plagiarism, Thomas donated a new digital scoreboard to the athletics department. The principal quietly allowed Chloe to keep the trophy to avoid a scandal. They taught her that reality was malleable, provided you smiled and wore the right designer label. She applied that exact philosophy to her venture capital pitch. She presented inflated user engagement statistics, manipulated profit margins, and fabricated direct-to-consumer sales figures. She convinced the junior partners at the syndicate. They prepared to underwrite the loan, eager to add a prominent influencer to their portfolio. However, institutional investment requires rigorous due diligence. That specific syndicate retained my firm to manage their risk assessment and ensure federal regulatory compliance. 3 days after her pitch, a digital underwriting file bearing my sister's name populated in my secure queue. I sat in my corner office overlooking the financial district. I opened the electronic dossier. I felt no surge of vindictive triumph. I approached the file with the same detached scrutiny I applied to every corporate audit. My profession dictates objective analysis. Numbers do not possess emotions, and they rarely lie when subjected to proper forensic pressure. I examined the attached profit and loss statements. The discrepancies emerged within 10 minutes. Chloe claimed a monthly recurring revenue of $40,000. I pulled the application programming interface data from her digital storefront and traced the merchant routing numbers. The deposits did not originate from authentic retail transactions. She engaged in round-trip funding. She utilized the Vanguard Sterling corporate card to purchase her own inventory, shipping the product to a third-party logistics warehouse where it sat untouched. She then recorded those purchases as organic consumer sales on her balance sheet. I pulled the corresponding tax filings she submitted to the underwriters. The digital signatures on the federal documents were poorly forged, indicating a frantic attempt to align her fictitious revenue with Internal Revenue Service formatting. She even utilized a fake employer identification number to mask her true payroll deficit. She committed textbook wire fraud in a desperate bid to secure corporate financing. I did not reject the application out of spite. I merely executed the strict federal compliance protocols dictated by my profession. I documented the forged tax returns, highlighted the circular cash flow in a detailed spreadsheet, and cited the relevant banking statutes. I categorized the portfolio as a severe compliance risk. Furthermore, standard operating procedure required me to file a suspicious activity report with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. This action legally bound the banking institution to freeze the application pending an internal review. I initiated a hard block on the transaction. The syndicate algorithms automatically logged the rejection, placing her corporate entity on an internal blacklist across their entire financial ecosystem. She was legally barred from accessing any capital within that network. On Thursday afternoon, Chloe sat at a corner table in a high-end matcha bar in Soho. The air smelled of roasted green tea and expensive oat milk. She wore a tailored linen suit, expecting the loan disbursement to hit her business account by 5 o'clock. She tapped the screen of her smartphone and logged into the syndicate portal to check the transfer status. A bright red notification banner materialized across her screen. The bold text read, "Denied compliance risk." The notification effectively terminated her brand. Her hands began to shake. She approached the register to pay for her beverage. The espresso machine hissed in the background. The barista, wearing a canvas apron, held the contactless payment terminal outward. Chloe tapped her sleek metal business debit card against the screen. The terminal emitted a sharp, dissonant beep. An insufficient funds error flashed across the display. She fumbled through her designer purse, producing a personal credit card. That card, tied to our father's frozen account, also declined. The barista offered a polite but strained smile. The line of affluent customers behind Chloe shifted impatiently, their eyes burning into her back. The carefully constructed influencer persona fractured under the weight of public embarrassment. Stripped of her purchasing power, she was forced to abandon the beverage and walk out of the cafe empty-handed. The collapse of her business venture sent shockwaves back to Greenwich. Chloe fled to her apartment and called our mother in tears, claiming a systemic error ruined her financing. Victoria, already reeling from her revoked country club status and facing mounting foreclosure notices, required a tangible enemy. She refused to accept that her favorite daughter committed financial fraud or that her husband squandered their estate. She concluded that I orchestrated a deliberate, illegal cyber attack against our family. Stripped of her financial leverage, Victoria decided to wage a public war using the only weapon she had left. She believed she still controlled the social narrative. She opened her laptop, intending to destroy my professional reputation through a calculated campaign of digital warfare. She assumed I would cower under the threat of public shame, unaware that my legal team was already monitoring the digital perimeter. My mother operated under the assumption that whoever spoke the loudest automatically owned the truth. For 3 decades, Victoria governed her social circle through calculated whispers and strategic sympathy. If a neighbor offended her, she did not confront them directly. She simply planted a quiet rumor at a charity luncheon regarding their marital stability or their financial liquidity. Within a month, the offending neighbor would find themselves mysteriously excluded from summer galas and tennis tournaments. Victoria treated reputation as a weapon. Now, facing the sudden evaporation of her wealth, she aimed that weapon at me. On Friday morning, she retreated to the sunroom of her Greenwich estate. The residential retainer I canceled had not yet triggered the formal foreclosure protocols, granting her a temporary illusion of security within those walls. She sat on a velvet chaise lounge, holding her silver tablet, and opened the primary communication hub for the local elite. It was a private, heavily moderated social media group named the Greenwich Heritage Alliance. The roster included 500 of the most influential residents in the county. Victoria drafted a lengthy, emotional publication. She titled the post, "A Family Tragedy." She did not mention the canceled credit cards. She omitted the Vanguard Sterling corporate structure. Instead, she spun a narrative of profound maternal grief. She typed out a story claiming I had recently suffered a severe psychotic break. She described me as a deeply disturbed individual, harboring pathological jealousy toward my younger sister. The climax of her digital essay contained a very specific, highly actionable accusation. She claimed I used my accounting expertise to illegally hack their personal banking portals, draining their life savings in a fit of paranoid delusion. She ended the post by asking her peers for prayers during this dark chapter, painting herself as the stoic matriarch enduring the unpredictable wrath of a mentally unstable child. She pressed publish at 9 in the morning. She expected the post to generate an immediate wave of sympathy. She anticipated flower deliveries and comforting phone calls from wealthy peers eager to consume the fresh scandal. More importantly, she expected me to react. She assumed I would read the public humiliation and panic. She calculated that I would call her in tears, begging her to take the post down, opening the door for her to negotiate the return of her monthly allowance. She fundamentally misunderstood the environment she was attacking. I did not learn about the post through the neighborhood grapevine. I learned about it through a digital threat assessment alert. Due to my position as a corporate compliance director, my firm retains a specialized cybersecurity division to monitor executive mentions across various digital platforms. The algorithms flag any online activity that could impact shareholder confidence or corporate integrity. At 9:15, my office phone rang. The head of digital security informed me that a highly defamatory statement bearing my name was gaining rapid traction within a geographically localized network. He forwarded the link to my secure terminal. I sat in my ergonomic chair and read my mother's creative fiction. I felt no sting of betrayal. I did not experience a spike in blood pressure. I simply recognized a profound tactical error. In her desperate bid to reclaim the social narrative, Victoria had transitioned from being a familial nuisance to creating a documented legal liability. By publishing a written statement claiming I committed federal cyber theft and suffered from mental instability, she crossed the threshold into libel per se. She explicitly attacked my professional fitness. In the corporate compliance sector, a managing director cannot possess a public reputation associated with financial hacking or psychiatric breaks. She handed me the exact ammunition required to introduce her to the American judicial system. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the internal extension for Elena. She serves as the lead litigator for our corporate counsel. Elena is a woman who treats the law like a scalpel. She walked into my office 3 minutes later, carrying a digital notepad. I turned my monitor toward her. She read the publication in silence. She just accused a forensic accountant of executing a hostile cyber attack on a public forum, Elena stated, her voice devoid of any inflection. This is textbook tortious interference with a prospective business advantage. Are we sending a standard cease and desist order? A standard cease and desist letter implies a warning, I replied, keeping my gaze on the screen. It gives the target an opportunity to correct their behavior without immediate consequence. We are not offering warnings today. Initiate a full digital preservation protocol. I want a spoliation of evidence notice drafted and delivered before the lunch hour. Elena nodded and left the room to activate the legal machinery. While Victoria sat in her sunroom, waiting for my emotional surrender, my cybersecurity team executed a silent, flawless capture of her digital footprint. They did not simply take screenshots. Screenshots can be dismissed as manipulated images. They utilized specialized archiving software to capture the raw, hypertext markup language of the web page. They recorded the exact Internet Protocol address originating from her Greenwich router. They extracted the precise digital timestamps and encrypted the entire package with a cryptographic hash. The evidence was instantly locked into a federal legal server, rendering it immutable and admissible in any court of law. Once the data was secured, Elena drafted the spoliation notice. This specific legal document mandates that the recipient must preserve all electronic communications, hard drives, and digital devices related to an impending civil lawsuit. It serves as the formal declaration of legal warfare. We needed to guarantee the delivery of this document. We needed a method that could not be ignored, deleted, or routed to a spam folder. We targeted my father's logistics firm. Thomas operated out of a midtown office suite. His remaining staff worked in an open-plan bullpen surrounding a central administrative hub. At 11:45, the primary corporate fax machine in his office groaned to life. The device began printing a dense 10-page legal document bearing the bold letterhead of my accounting firm's litigation department. The title printed in stark black ink: Notice of Impending Civil Litigation and Demand for Preservation of Evidence. An administrative assistant retrieved the pages from the tray. She read the first paragraph, her eyes widening as she recognized her employer's name attached to a looming lawsuit for defamation and corporate sabotage. She carried the stack of papers directly to my father's glass-walled office, effectively broadcasting the legal crisis to the entire floor. Thomas read the document sitting behind his mahogany desk. The spoliation letter meticulously detailed his wife's defamatory statements. It outlined the exact financial damages my firm intended to pursue, a figure well into the 7 digits. It demanded the immediate surrender of their personal electronics for forensic cloning. The document illuminated a terrifying reality. The corporate entity that just froze his checking accounts was now preparing to seize whatever assets he had left through civil litigation. He picked up his cell phone and dialed his wife's number. Victoria was still sitting on her velvet chaise lounge when her screen flashed with his call. She answered with a practiced, breathless sigh, ready to recount the supportive comments she was receiving online. Thomas did not let her speak. His voice shattered her calm demeanor, echoing through the speaker with raw, unfiltered panic. He informed her about the legal notice sitting on his desk. He screamed that her little social media stunt just invited a multi-million-dollar corporate lawsuit into their home. The color drained from her face. The comfortable illusion of her sunroom evaporated. She ended the call with trembling hands and immediately opened the social media application on her tablet. The supportive comments and sympathetic emojis suddenly looked like a string of indictments. She navigated to the drop-down menu on her publication. Her manicured index finger hovered over the screen. She tapped the red delete button. A confirmation dialog box appeared, asking if she was sure she wanted to remove the post permanently. She struck the confirm option with frantic force. The post vanished from her timeline. The screen refreshed, displaying an empty digital space. Victoria exhaled a long, shaky breath, sinking back into the velvet cushions. She closed her eyes, experiencing a fleeting rush of relief. She genuinely believed that making the words disappear from her screen meant they ceased to exist in the real world. She remained entirely unaware that her desperate deletion was captured on the server logs, adding the secondary charge of destroying evidence to her growing list of legal liabilities. The digital erasure provided no safety. The legal gears were already grinding forward, unstoppable and indifferent to her panic. Realizing that the internet could no longer protect them, my parents understood they needed to repair their rapidly decaying social armor in person. They required a physical venue to project stability, assure their peers that the rumors of their demise were exaggerated, and reestablish their dominance in the hierarchy. They decided to host an emergency damage control brunch at their exclusive country club that weekend, assuming the prestigious location would shield them from consequence. They did not realize the architect of their ruin was already standing at the front gates. When individuals whose entire identities rely on social perception find themselves backed into a corner, they do not self-reflect. They host a brunch. The legal preservation notice delivered to my father's office generated an immediate requirement for damage control. Thomas and Victoria understood that rumors of their impending civil litigation and financial distress would spread through their elite circles by Monday morning. They needed to project an image of unshakable solvency to their peers. They required a public stage to perform their pantomime of wealth. They selected the Oak Ridge Country Club. Oak Ridge represented the epicenter of Connecticut high society. Membership required a rigorous vetting process, a 6-figure initiation fee, and exorbitant quarterly dues. My parents treated the institution with a level of reverence they never afforded their own children. When I was 17 years old, I earned the title of high school valedictorian. The graduation ceremony coincided with the annual Oak Ridge Summer Solstice Gala. My parents chose the gala. They prioritized a cocktail reception over witnessing my academic pinnacle. That property served as their sanctuary, their true home, and the baseline metric for their self-worth. They spent Saturday afternoon calling in favors, assembling a guest list designed to maximize optical leverage. They invited 10 influential figures, including a hospital board director, a prominent state senator, and the local mayor. The strategy was transparent. Surrounding themselves with municipal power players would signal to the community that the Stephen family remained untouchable. They failed to account for the hidden architecture of their chosen sanctuary. 8 months prior, Oak Ridge faced a quiet, severe liquidity crisis. Decades of poor fiscal management and lenient collection practices pushed the establishment to the brink of insolvency. The board of directors panicked and hired an external corporate compliance firm to restructure their financial operations. They hired my firm. I personally directed the risk assessment. I spent weeks auditing their ledgers, identifying the exact vulnerabilities draining their capital. I discovered that dozens of prominent members carried delinquent accounts for months, utilizing their social standing to avoid paying their tabs. To save the institution, I authored a strict zero-tolerance collections mandate. The new bylaws eradicated all discretionary grace periods. I implemented an automated protocol stating that any account falling past 30 days delinquent would face immediate suspension, public denial of entry, and summary revocation of membership. My parents walked into a snare I engineered long before I ever took the microphone at their anniversary party. Sunday morning arrived with bright, clear skies. Thomas and Victoria arrived at the grand portico of Oak Ridge in their least luxury sedan. The valet opened their doors. Victoria wore a pristine, tailored linen suit, projecting an aura of carefree elegance. Thomas stood tall, adjusting his silk tie, radiating false confidence. Their 10 distinguished guests waited in the magnificent marble foyer. The group exchanged polite greetings and subtle flattery, preparing to head toward the private dining terrace overlooking the 18th hole. They did not make it past the reception desk. Gregory, the general manager of Oak Ridge, emerged from his glass-walled office. Gregory possessed the refined, deferential demeanor required to manage fragile egos, but he also strictly adhered to the new compliance protocols my firm installed. He intercepted the group near the towering floral arrangement in the center of the foyer. He held a slim, black leather folio. Thomas smiled, anticipating a customary greeting. He extended his hand. Gregory did not return the gesture. "Sir," Gregory began, his voice pitched low enough to maintain decorum, but clear enough to carry across the polished stone floor. "I apologize for the interruption, but there is an administrative hold on your account. I must ask you to step into my office to resolve the discrepancy before we can seat your party." Thomas offered a dismissive chuckle, waving his hand as if swatting away a minor insect. He assumed this was a routine clerical error, easily solved with a swift signature. He refused to step away from his audience. "Nonsense, Gregory," Thomas replied, projecting his voice for the mayor and the senator to hear. "Whatever the issue is, just put it on my primary card on file. We have guests waiting for mimosas." Gregory maintained his rigid posture. He opened the leather folio. "Sir, the primary card on file, associated with the Vanguard Sterling Holding Company, declined a scheduled transaction on Tuesday morning. Our automated billing software subsequently attempted to draw from your secondary personal accounts. Those transactions also returned with insufficient funds codes." The casual smile surrounding Thomas began to falter. The mayor tilted his head, his political instincts sensing a sudden shift in the atmosphere. Victoria touched her pearl necklace, her fingers visibly trembling. "Keep your voice down," Thomas hissed, the facade of the jovial host rapidly evaporating. "Run the secondary card again." "Your system is clearly experiencing a glitch." "There is no glitch, Mr. Stephen," Gregory stated, adopting a firmer tone. Your account is currently $22,000 in arrears. This total includes your quarterly maintenance dues and 3 months of accumulated dining tabs. Per the new fiduciary bylaws implemented by our restructuring committee, any account carrying a delinquent balance of this magnitude is subject to immediate termination. The silence that fell over the grand foyer was absolute. $22,000 was a trivial sum for the individuals standing in that circle, making my father's inability to produce the capital profoundly humiliating. He was exposed not just as a debtor, but as a pretender. Thomas reached into his breast pocket and extracted a personal debit card. He thrust the plastic toward the general manager. "Run this right now," he ordered, his face flushing a deep, mottled crimson. Gregory signaled to the concierge standing behind the mahogany desk. The young attendant processed the card through the terminal. 3 seconds later, the machine emitted a sharp, dissonant beep. The attendant looked up and shook his head. Declined. The state senator cleared his throat, suddenly finding the vaulted ceiling architecture fascinating. The hospital board director subtly took a half step away from Victoria, creating a physical boundary to match the newly formed social divide. The contagion of poverty is a terrifying concept to the elite. "Sir," Gregory continued, closing the leather folio, "our policies are unequivocal. I cannot permit you or your guests to access the dining facilities. Furthermore, I must ask you to surrender your credentials. Your access to this property is officially revoked." Thomas stood paralyzed. The crimson flush on his face drained away, leaving a pallid gray complexion. He opened his mouth, but his throat produced no sound. The man who spent his entire adult life dictating terms to his subordinates found himself entirely stripped of agency. Victoria attempted to intervene, deploying her final reserve of social manipulation. "Gregory, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We have been loyal patrons of this establishment for 2 decades. You know us. You cannot humiliate us in front of the mayor." "Ma'am, you are humiliating yourselves by refusing to vacate the premises," Gregory replied, his professional courtesy hardening into a cold directive. "The physical cards, please." Defeated and devoid of any remaining leverage, Thomas reached into his wallet. His hands shook as he withdrew the 2 heavy, embossed plastic rectangles, granting them access to their private paradise. He handed them to the general manager. Gregory did not place the credentials into his pocket. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket and retrieved a pair of silver shears. He held the tools up, aligning the first plastic rectangle between the sharp blades. He squeezed the handles. The crisp, metallic snap echoed off the marble walls. He repeated the action with the second credential. The severed pieces fell into his open palm. The physical destruction of their membership served as the ultimate execution of their social identity. It was a precise, undeniable visual confirmation that they no longer belonged. "I must ask you to leave the property immediately," Gregory instructed, gesturing toward the glass entrance doors. Thomas and Victoria did not say goodbye to their esteemed guests. They did not offer an excuse or a parting pleasantry. They turned around and walked toward the exit, moving with the slow, unsteady gait of survivors emerging from a shipwreck. The valet, having witnessed the entire exchange, already had their leased sedan waiting at the curb. The drive back to Greenwich occurred in total, suffocating silence. Their sanctuary was gone. Their reputation was permanently ruined. They possessed no capital, no credit, and no standing within the community they valued above their own flesh and blood. The systemic trap left them with 0 options, forcing them to turn to the only remaining member of their inner circle for salvation. They dialed Chloe. They expected their youngest daughter to provide a temporary financial lifeline. They did not realize Chloe was sitting in her Tribeca loft, staring at her own eviction notices and failed venture capital applications. The golden child was equally destitute. Faced with the simultaneous collapse of her wellness startup and her parents' estate, Chloe panicked. She required an immediate infusion of wealth to maintain her influencer facade and save her family from public ruin. She concocted a desperate survival strategy. She needed to legally attach herself to someone who possessed the liquidity they all lacked. She targeted Harrison, a wealthy technology executive she had been casually dating for 3 months. To secure a rapid marriage proposal, Chloe needed to present an image of equal standing and generational stability. She required a physical prop to validate her fabricated pedigree. On Tuesday morning, she posted a new photograph to her digital platforms. The image featured her hand resting gracefully on a steering wheel, displaying a sudden, unexpected engagement. She flaunted a massive vintage sapphire ring surrounded by a halo of brilliant cut diamonds. Her caption claimed Harrison commissioned the custom piece for $70,000 to celebrate their eternal love. The photograph garnered thousands of immediate congratulations from her followers. It served as the perfect public relations distraction for her failing business. There was only one fatal flaw in her digital performance. When I viewed the high-resolution image on my encrypted monitor, I did not see a custom piece of modern jewelry. I recognized the distinct, microscopic scratch on the left side of the gold bezel. It was the exact scratch I caused when I dropped the jewelry box at 8 years old. Chloe was wearing our late grandmother's heirloom, a physical asset legally bequeathed exclusively to me in a sealed estate document 3 years prior. My sister just published photographic evidence of a felony theft. When individuals accustomed to limitless resources face a sudden financial vacuum, they rarely choose a path of humble reconstruction. They seek a new host. Chloe sat in her Tribeca loft surrounded by unpaid utility bills, canceled credit cards, and the smoldering wreckage of her wellness startup. The frantic phone call from our parents regarding their expulsion from the country club confirmed her worst fears. The generational safety net was gone. She required an immediate infusion of capital and a powerful public relations distraction to obscure her pending bankruptcy. She needed to secure a permanent attachment to a solvent entity. She targeted Harrison. Harrison was a 38-year-old technology executive who specialized in data analytics and supply chain logistics. He built a highly successful firm predicated on the principles of radical transparency and verifiable metrics. He possessed a sharp, analytical mind, but his demanding professional schedule left him with little bandwidth to scrutinize his romantic life. He sought a partner who projected an image of effortless stability, someone who brought their own established pedigree to the table and required zero financial maintenance. For 3 months, Chloe played that role to perfection. She mirrored his interests, paid for expensive dinners using my corporate funds, and spun elaborate tales about her thriving independent business. Sensing the imminent collapse of her carefully curated facade, Chloe accelerated her timeline. She could not wait for Harrison to reach a natural decision regarding marriage. She needed to force his hand and bind him to her before the truth about her insolvency reached his social circle. She orchestrated a sudden engagement, utilizing a physical prop to validate her fabricated worth. On Tuesday morning, the internet demanded fresh content, and Chloe delivered a masterclass in optical manipulation. She published a new photograph across all her digital platforms. The image was meticulously staged. It featured her left hand resting gracefully against the leather steering wheel of a luxury vehicle. Her manicured fingers were positioned to catch the optimal morning light. Adorning her ring finger was a breathtaking vintage sapphire surrounded by a halo of brilliant cut diamonds set in aged platinum and 18-karat yellow gold. Her caption was an exercise in pure fiction. She announced her eternal commitment to Harrison. She claimed he spent 6 months collaborating with a private European jeweler to source the materials and design the bespoke setting. She subtly estimated the value of the piece at $70,000, ensuring her followers understood the financial magnitude of his devotion. The post generated thousands of immediate congratulations, serving as the perfect digital shield against the looming rumors of her business failure. There was only one fatal flaw in her performance. I sat in my corner office and viewed the high-resolution image on my secondary monitor. My profession trains the eye to search for anomalies. Fraud always leaves a distinct signature, a stray variable that refuses to align with the presented narrative. I ignored the generic comments flooding her timeline. I focused my attention entirely on the central asset. The gemstone was a deep, unheated salon blue. It was undeniably a masterpiece of antique craftsmanship. It was also not a custom creation commissioned by a technology executive. 3 years ago, my paternal grandmother Beatrice passed away. Beatrice was a pragmatic, formidable woman who built her own fortune through textile manufacturing in the 1970s. She recognized the superficial nature of my parents long before I possessed the vocabulary to articulate it. During my exile at boarding school, Beatrice was the sole relative who consistently maintained contact. She wrote me letters discussing global markets, compound interest, and the importance of financial independence. She saw my analytical mind not as a social liability, but as a crucial survival tool. During the formal reading of her estate, the executor unsealed a specific private addendum. Beatrice bypassed my father and my sister entirely regarding her personal jewelry collection. She bequeathed her most valuable, tangible asset, the vintage salon sapphire ring, exclusively to me. The legal documentation was airtight, verified by multiple independent witnesses. When the probate process concluded, I formally requested the physical transfer of the asset. Victoria acted as the custodian of the estate during the transition period. She met me in her Greenwich foyer with a rehearsed, tragic expression. She claimed the ring vanished during the transfer of my grandmother's belongings to the secure storage facility. She blamed careless moving contractors and chaotic inventory management. She offered to write me a personal check for a fraction of the appraised value to compensate for the unfortunate oversight. I declined her money. I knew she was lying. Victoria coveted that sapphire for decades, and her ego could not tolerate watching it pass to the forgotten daughter. However, without physical proof of her possession or a police search warrant, pursuing the matter through probate court would yield a protracted, expensive legal stalemate. I chose to wait. I understood the psychology of vanity. I knew that stolen, high-value accessories inevitably demand an audience. A woman like my mother or my sister could never keep a $70,000 treasure hidden in a dark safe forever. I leaned closer to my monitor. I opened an image enhancement software program standard in digital forensic audits. I downloaded the engagement photograph and isolated the gold bezel securing the central blue gemstone. I increased the contrast, adjusted the exposure levels, and sharpened the resolution. The digital enhancement revealed the undeniable truth. On the lower left quadrant of the metal setting, a microscopic, distinct groove marred the otherwise pristine gold. When I was 8 years old, I sneaked into my grandmother's dressing room. I wanted to look at the beautiful objects she kept on her vanity. I picked up the heavy velvet jewelry box with clumsy, uncoordinated hands. The velvet slipped through my fingers. The box tumbled downward, and the ring struck the sharp corner of a marble countertop. The impact created that exact, unique scratch on the bezel. It was a permanent, physical record of my childhood mistake, and it now served as the ultimate proof of ownership. Chloe was not merely wearing a borrowed family accessory. She was actively displaying a stolen heirloom valued well above the felony threshold for grand larceny. She utilized the purloined property to secure a marriage of convenience under entirely false pretenses. She lied to her digital audience. She lied to her prospective husband, and she provided documented photographic evidence of her possession of the asset. The conflict shifted domains in a fraction of a second. This was no longer a civil dispute over defamation or a corporate matter regarding unpaid country club dues. This was a direct violation of the penal code. A conventional sibling might send a furious text message demanding the immediate return of the item. A vindictive sister might post a public comment exposing the lie to the internet, initiating a messy online shouting match. Both of those actions operate on emotion and provide the thief an opportunity to hide the asset, destroy the evidence, or invent a new exculpatory narrative. I do not operate on emotion. I operate on verified documentation and systemic consequences. I opened my encrypted personal server and located my legal archives. I retrieved the certified copy of the probated will, featuring the signature of the estate executor. I then located the original insurance appraisal documents my grandmother secured a decade prior. The paperwork detailed the precise carat weight, the clarity grade, and the identifying imperfections of the setting, explicitly noting the minor damage to the lower left bezel. Harrison constructed his entire life on the principles of data integrity. He abhorred deception and demanded authenticity in his corporate dealings. Chloe calculated that wearing a massive ring would blind him to her true nature and force a permanent commitment. She failed to calculate the severe legal vulnerability of her chosen strategy. By publicly claiming Harrison purchased the ring, she unwittingly implicated him in the chain of custody for stolen goods. By transporting the asset across state lines to her Tribeca loft, she triggered potential federal jurisdictional issues. I gathered the legal files into a single, comprehensive digital portfolio. I did not intend to argue with my sister about the morality of her theft. I intended to execute a flawless retrieval. I prepared to contact my insurance provider to file a formal claim for stolen property exceeding $50,000. The protocol for high-value theft is rigid and uncompromising. The insurance investigators would immediately notify the municipal police department to initiate a criminal inquiry. The trap was perfectly set, and I would let law enforcement serve as the messengers to deliver the final blow to her fabricated romance. I did not draft a text message to my sister. I did not call my mother to demand an explanation or an apology. Family disputes thrive on the oxygen provided by emotional engagement. They rely on screaming matches and tearful accusations to obscure the underlying facts. I prefer the sterile vacuum of the legal system. When you remove emotion from a conflict, you are left with a simple equation of action and consequence. I contacted my private insurance broker on Wednesday morning. Submitting a claim for a stolen heirloom valued at $70,000 requires specific, verifiable documentation. I did not provide a narrative. I provided data. I submitted the probated will, the certified appraisal documents, and the digital enhancement of the engagement photograph, clearly displaying the unique scratch on the bezel. The insurance underwriter reviewed the file and activated their internal high-value theft protocol. Insurance conglomerates do not absorb five-figure losses due to sibling rivalry. They are legally required to involve municipal law enforcement for any stolen asset exceeding the felony grand larceny threshold. The matter transferred from my desk to the precinct within 4 hours. While the detectives processed the warrant, Chloe focused on securing her new reality. Harrison hosted an intimate cocktail gathering on Thursday evening at his Manhattan penthouse to formally introduce his prospective bride to his inner circle. Harrison was a man who engineered his entire existence around verifiable metrics. He built his technology firm on the premise of flawless data integrity. He required a partner who matched his standard of transparency. Chloe spent 3 months mirroring those traits, hiding her financial insolvency behind the illusion of my corporate capital. She assumed the stolen sapphire secured her permanent position in his life. She failed to consider the presence of his mother. Evelyn was a matriarch of the old guard. She did not utilize social media to vet her acquaintances. She utilized private investigators and quiet background checks. She already harbored severe suspicions regarding the sudden engagement and the extravagant jewelry her son supposedly commissioned. Evelyn sat in a velvet armchair in the corner of the penthouse, sipping a martini, watching Chloe parade the stolen heirloom across the room. She waited for a crack in the facade. At 8:15, the lobby concierge rang the private line. 2 plainclothes detectives from the Financial Crimes and Theft Division requested entry. Harrison, assuming a routine inquiry regarding a former employee or a minor corporate compliance matter, authorized their arrival. He possessed no context to feel fear. He operated a legitimate enterprise and lived a structured, predictable life. The private elevator doors parted. The detectives stepped into the ambient lighting of the cocktail party. They did not shout or draw weapons. Financial crimes are executed with quiet, methodical precision. The lead detective approached the host. He displayed his badge and asked to speak with Chloe Stephen regarding an active investigation into stolen property. The soft jazz music playing through the hidden speakers seemed to amplify the sudden, rigid silence descending upon the room. Chloe stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows holding a glass of imported wine. The color vanished from her face. She recognized the inevitable collision of her fabricated digital life and the concrete reality of the penal code. The detective approached her and requested she confirm her identity. He then asked her to explain the origin of the sapphire ring currently resting on her left hand. She attempted a final, desperate pivot. She forced a hollow laugh and looked at Harrison, waiting for him to confirm the bespoke commission story she peddled to her digital followers. She expected him to protect her, assuming his wealth and status would shield her from law enforcement. Harrison looked back at her with a blank, unreadable expression. He stated clearly that he did not purchase the jewelry. He told the detectives she claimed it was a family heirloom passed down through her maternal lineage. He refused to lie to the authorities to protect a narrative he did not author. The detective retrieved a folded document from his jacket pocket. It was the sworn affidavit and the certified probate record I provided to the insurance firm. He informed the room that the item matched the exact description of a stolen asset legally belonging to Helen Stephen. He cited the microscopic scratch on the lower left gold bezel. He stated they possessed probable cause to seize the item as active evidence in a grand larceny inquiry. The penthouse offered no sanctuary. Evelyn set her martini glass on the side table, her eyes locked onto the unfolding spectacle with cold, validating judgment. She always knew the influencer persona was a hollow shell, and the police presence simply confirmed her initial hypothesis. The detective held out a clear, thick, plastic evidence bag. He instructed Chloe to surrender the jewelry. Her hands shook with uncontrollable tremors. She struggled to slide the heavy metal band over her knuckle. The friction of her panic made the physical task exceedingly difficult. She finally pulled the sapphire off her finger and dropped it into the plastic pouch. The heavy gemstone hit the bottom of the bag with a dull, pathetic thud. The physical removal of the ring stripped away her final layer of armor. She stood in the center of the lavish gathering, exposed as a common thief in front of the very people she intended to impress. Harrison absorbed the scene with the calculating processing speed of a data scientist. He witnessed his prospective wife surrender stolen property to municipal detectives in his own home. He recognized the magnitude of her deception. She lied about her wealth. She lied about the origin of the ring. She utilized his pristine reputation to construct a digital shield for a felony offense. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand a tearful apology or an explanation. A broken algorithm cannot be reasoned with. It can only be discarded. Harrison stepped back, creating a deliberate physical chasm between them. He informed her that the engagement was terminated effective immediately. He instructed his personal security detail to escort her out of the building. Chloe was guided into the freight elevator, stripped of her stolen asset and her future stability. Her golden ticket evaporated not because of a jealous sibling rivalry, but due to the objective, unyielding actions of law enforcement. She returned to her Tribeca loft facing imminent criminal charges and insurmountable debt. My parents were already exiled from their social sanctuary. My sister was now isolated and under federal scrutiny. Only one pillar of their false empire remained standing. My father's boutique logistics firm kept a fragile roof over their heads. On Friday morning, I sat at my glass desk and opened my encrypted email portal. I received an internal memorandum from my firm's corporate auditing division. A new independent compliance review was scheduled for the upcoming fiscal quarter. The target of the forensic audit was an import and export company requiring deep financial restructuring due to suspected internal irregularities. The chief executive officer of that failing logistics company was Thomas Stephen. The email arrived in my secure inbox at 8 in the morning. My firm dominates the Northeastern Corridor for corporate restructuring and forensic risk assessment. When a mid-sized enterprise suspects internal fiscal irregularities, they contract us to perform the autopsy. I opened the digital memorandum. The incoming client was a supply chain management firm named Horizon Global Logistics. Horizon was the engine that powered my family's illusion. Thomas served as the chief executive officer. He shared equity with a silent partner named Mitchell. Mitchell functioned as the operational workhorse, navigating the actual shipping routes and managing the warehouse personnel. My father focused exclusively on client acquisition, which served as a convenient euphemism for playing golf and drinking scotch on weekday afternoons. For years, Mitchell trusted the division of labor. He assumed the dwindling profit margins were a symptom of shifting global tariffs and increased fuel costs. However, numbers eventually demand an explanation. Following the abrupt cancellation of my Vanguard Sterling retainer, Thomas required immediate liquid capital to replace the missing funds. He became reckless. Mitchell noticed discrepancies in the quarterly cash flow projections and bypassed my father to hire an independent auditing authority. By sheer geographic and industry dominance, he selected my organization. Professional ethics dictate a rigid protocol for these scenarios. I could not personally investigate my own blood relative without compromising the integrity of the findings. I drafted a formal recusal document, citing a direct conflict of interest regarding the target entity. I submitted the paperwork to the executive board. I removed myself from the primary investigative team. Recusal does not equate to exile. As the Director of Corporate Compliance, I retained ultimate oversight over the final legal deliverables. I assigned the Horizon portfolio to my sharpest senior auditor. Her name was Sarah. She possessed a ruthless eye for numerical inconsistencies and viewed financial deception as a personal insult. I instructed her to treat the logistics company with the exact same unyielding scrutiny she applied to Fortune 500 accounts. Sarah deployed her team on Monday morning. They executed a standard digital seizure, pulling the master ledgers, expense reports, and tax filings directly from the Horizon servers. Thomas attempted to block their access, citing proprietary vendor confidentiality. Sarah responded by threatening to notify the Federal Trade Commission. Thomas capitulated. He handed over the encryption keys, likely believing his elementary accounting tricks would survive a professional sweep. He underestimated the evolution of forensic tracking software. Corporate fraud rarely involves sophisticated offshore shell companies. It usually involves arrogant men coding personal luxuries as business liabilities. Sarah established a command center in a conference room down the hall from my office. Her team spent 3 days dissecting 5 years of Horizon transaction history. They cross-referenced every outgoing wire transfer against legitimate shipping manifests. On Thursday afternoon, Sarah knocked on my glass door. She held a single printed spreadsheet. She walked in and placed the document flat on my desk. She did not offer a dramatic preamble. She simply pointed to a specific line item from the previous fiscal year. The entry recorded a $14,000 outgoing wire transfer. The internal accounting code categorized the expense as Emergency Overseas Freight Logistics. The payee was a limited liability company registered in Mexico. I studied the date attached to the wire transfer. My memory possesses a photographic index of my family's social media timelines. The date aligned perfectly with a specific digital campaign Chloe launched last spring. She spent 10 days at an ultra-exclusive wellness retreat in Tulum, posting daily photographs of private cabanas and holistic yoga sessions. She claimed her startup sponsored the trip for brand development. I retrieved a red pen from my desk drawer. I drew a precise circle around the $14,000 figure. I informed Sarah that the overseas freight logistics charge paid for my sister's luxury vacation. Sarah offered a grim, validating nod. A single confirmed instance of embezzlement acts like a loose thread on a cheap garment. Once you pull it, the entire structure unravels. Sarah returned to the conference room and directed her team to scrutinize every subjective expense category in my father's ledger. They targeted vendor relations, client entertainment, and executive travel. The illusion of the Stephen family dynasty was stripped down to its fraudulent foundations over the next 48 hours. The forensic auditors discovered a recurring monthly charge labeled as warehouse facility maintenance. The routing numbers matched the exact rental portal for Chloe's luxury Tribeca apartment. Thomas utilized corporate capital to keep his golden child housed in a premium zip code. The discrepancies multiplied. Sarah found a series of invoices paid to an obscure Italian textile supplier. Horizon Global Logistics did not trade in textiles. They shipped industrial machinery. I cross-referenced the dates of those invoices. They correlated flawlessly with Victoria's annual autumn shopping excursions to Milan. My mother funded her designer wardrobe by draining the operational budget of a mid-sized shipping firm. The total sum of the diverted funds was staggering. Over a 4-year period, Thomas siphoned $200,000 from his own company to subsidize his family's vanity. This revelation fundamentally altered the trajectory of the conflict. Until this moment, the consequences my family faced were social and civil. They lost their country club access. They lost their credit score. Chloe lost her engagement due to the stolen heirloom. Those were painful, humiliating realities, but they were not federal offenses. Corporate embezzlement transcends bad behavior. It enters the realm of the penal code. Thomas stole money from his business partner. He falsified tax documents to hide the stolen funds from the Internal Revenue Service. He utilized wire transfers to execute the theft, triggering interstate and international banking regulations. My father was no longer just a failed businessman. He was a white-collar criminal sitting in the crosshairs of a federal indictment. On Friday morning, Sarah generated the final audit report. It was a dense, 40-page document. The dossier contained every forged invoice, every misdirected wire transfer, and every piece of supporting documentation required to secure a conviction. The report was bound in a simple black folder. It represented the total, objective destruction of Thomas Stephen. Sarah placed the folder on my desk for a final compliance review. I opened the cover. I read through the executive summary. The language was cold, factual, and legally impenetrable. I signed my name at the bottom of the oversight authorization page. The ink dried in seconds. I instructed Sarah to deliver a digital copy of the dossier to Mitchell. As the silent partner who initiated the audit, Mitchell held the legal right to view the findings immediately. I knew Mitchell well enough to predict his reaction. He would not offer grace. He would seek immediate restitution and punitive action. I also knew the protocol of the auditing software. The moment a final report was transmitted to the client, an automated notification would bounce back to the chief executive officer of the targeted company. Tomas would receive an email confirming the audit was complete. He would see the exact sum of his theft printed in the subject line. Furthermore, he would see the letterhead of the firm that executed the investigation. He would realize that the ghost he abandoned at boarding school was the architect overseeing his professional execution. I closed the black folder and checked my watch. It was 2 p.m. Thomas, he only had one card left to play, and it required him to abandon the last remaining shreds of his morality. He would not call his lawyer. He would come for me. He would attempt to leverage the only currency he thought he still controlled. I anticipated his arrival. I prepared my office for the impending confrontation, ensuring every safeguard was active. The end game was approaching my doorstep. The notification regarding the completed forensic review was delivered to the target company at 2 p.m. I remained at my glass desk as the sun dipped behind the Manhattan skyline, casting long geometric shadows across my office floor. White-collar criminals share a highly predictable behavioral matrix when the architecture of their fraud finally collapses. They experience a brief period of paralyzed shock, followed immediately by a surge of pure, unfiltered survival instinct. Thomas possessed no liquid assets to hire top-tier defense counsel. His social capital was incinerated at the country club. His only remaining currency was intimidation. I knew he would intercept me before the weekend commenced. He required a physical confrontation to exert the paternal dominance he relied upon for 3 decades. At 6 o'clock, I packed my leather briefcase. I walked to the executive elevator and pressed the button for the subterranean parking level. The descent took 40 seconds. During that brief window of isolation, I prepared my tactical countermeasures. I raised my left wrist and tapped the digital face of my smartwatch. I navigated to the secure voice memo application. I engaged the recording function and locked the screen. The device possesses a highly sensitive microphone designed to filter ambient noise and capture vocal frequencies with pristine clarity. The elevator doors parted. The underground garage felt cavernous and sterile. The air carried the heavy scent of cold concrete, damp earth, and motor exhaust. Fluorescent tubes hummed overhead, casting harsh, unyielding light between the parked luxury vehicles. I walked toward my reserved space. My heels clicked against the cement in a steady, metronomic rhythm. A figure stepped out from behind a thick structural pillar, deliberately blocking my path to the driver's side door. It was my father. The transformation in his physical appearance was stark and unsettling. The man who spent his mornings prioritizing silk pocket squares and imported cologne now looked unraveled. His suit jacket was deeply wrinkled. His tie hung loose and crooked around his collar. The confident, expansive posture he wielded like a weapon in social settings was replaced by a rigid, nervous tension. He looked like a man drowning who had just spotted a piece of driftwood. He did not offer a greeting. He held up his smartphone. The screen displayed the digital summary of the audit report my firm transmitted hours earlier. His hands possessed a noticeable tremor. He demanded to know if I was responsible for the forensic crucifixion of his logistics company. I stopped 3 feet away from him. I maintained a relaxed, neutral posture. I informed him that I formally recused myself from the active investigation due to our biological connection. I stated that my senior auditor uncovered the systemic embezzlement independently through objective data analysis. I merely provided the final signature of compliance oversight. The facts dictated the outcome, not my personal sentiment. My detached demeanor fractured his remaining composure. He expected me to gloat, to show anger, or to revel in my victory. My clinical indifference infuriated him. He took a step closer, intentionally invading my personal space. He lowered his voice into a harsh, raspy whisper that echoed faintly against the concrete walls. He declared that I would instruct my senior auditor to bury the findings. He demanded I alter the official record to categorize the stolen $200,000 as legitimate administrative accounting errors. I looked at him with genuine clinical curiosity. I asked him why I would risk my own federal accounting license, face potential disbarment, and risk prison time to cover up his corporate theft. A dark, desperate calculation washed over his face. He revealed his extortion strategy. He informed me that if I allowed the audit to reach his business partner, he would file a formal grievance with the state licensing board. He planned to accuse me of elder financial abuse. Thomas laid out his fabricated narrative with terrifying precision. He intended to claim that the Vanguard Sterling Group was a predatory trap. He would testify under oath that I used my financial expertise to hijack their personal accounts, isolate them from their assets, and systematically ruin their credit score. He would argue that I orchestrated their eviction from the country club and the collapse of their estate through vindictive financial manipulation. In the eyes of a regulatory board, an accusation of elder abuse against a certified public accountant triggers an automatic license suspension pending a lengthy public investigation. He threatened to destroy my career, my pristine reputation, and my livelihood unless I falsified a federal corporate document to save his logistics firm. The betrayal was profound, yet it felt entirely expected. This was the man who exiled his 15-year-old daughter to a boarding school 3 states away because her quiet nature disrupted his aesthetic perfection. Threatening to burn my career to the ground to save his own skin was simply the final, logical evolution of his narcissism. He abandoned all pretense of fatherhood. He was merely a cornered animal biting at the hands of his captor. I needed the recording to be unequivocal. I required him to state the parameters of the blackmail with zero legal ambiguity. I looked him directly in the eyes. I summarized his terms aloud to ensure the microphone captured the context. I asked him to confirm that he was threatening to submit a false report of elder abuse to the state board, specifically to force me to bury the evidence of his corporate embezzlement. He did not hesitate. He confirmed the terms. He added that I owed him my loyalty because he provided the genetic material for my existence. He sneered, stating that I had 24 hours to retract the audit, or he would draft the complaint and send it to the regulatory authorities on Monday morning. As he finished delivering his ultimatum, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration pulsed against my left wrist. The haptic buzz signaled that the smartwatch software recognized a natural pause in the dialogue and automatically backed up the encrypted audio file to my secure cloud server. The extortion attempt was permanently preserved off-site. Even if he realized I was recording and destroyed the watch, the felony evidence was already in the possession of my legal counsel. I did not argue with his logic. I did not attempt to appeal to a moral compass he clearly did not possess. I pressed the button on my key fob. My vehicle unlocked. The headlights flashed, briefly illuminating his desperate, aging face. I opened the heavy car door and paused. I told him that an audit report is a reflection of reality, and reality is immune to blackmail. I advised him to skip the licensing board and spend his weekend securing a very skilled criminal defense attorney. I got into the driver's seat and closed the door, sealing myself inside the quiet cabin. I started the engine. Through the rearview mirror, I watched him stand frozen in the empty parking space. His final card was played, and it yielded nothing but another self-inflicted wound. As I drove up the concrete ramp toward the street level, my thoughts shifted to the impending dawn. The blackmail attempt failed, leaving him with a ruined company and a hostile business partner. Mitchell, the operational backbone of Horizon Global Logistics, was currently sitting in his own home, reading the unabridged dossier of my father's theft. Mitchell would not wait for the judicial system to grind into slow motion. He would demand an immediate corporate execution. Thomas was scheduled to walk into a boardroom the following morning to face the man he robbed for half a decade. I intended to be in that room when the final ledger was settled. Men facing imminent destruction often accelerate toward the edge rather than applying the brakes. Over the weekend, my father processed the reality of the forensic audit. He understood that Mitchell, his silent partner, possessed the 40-page dossier detailing the systemic theft of corporate funds. Thomas lacked the liquid capital to reimburse the stolen $200,000. He lacked the legal defense to dispute the accounting data. Therefore, he resorted to the only strategy remaining in his arsenal. He decided to execute a preemptive strike. Thomas called an emergency board meeting for 9 on Monday morning. He intended to initiate a hostile takeover. Horizon Global Logistics operated out of a sleek, mid-rise office building in the financial district. The boardroom featured floor-to-ceiling windows, a sprawling mahogany table, and ergonomic leather chairs. I arrived at 8:55. I did not enter the room immediately. I stood in the adjacent glass-walled corridor alongside Sarah, my senior auditor, waiting for the principals to assemble. Mitchell arrived first. Mitchell was a pragmatic, calloused man who built the operational infrastructure of Horizon from the ground up. While Thomas spent the last decade courting clients at pristine golf courses, Mitchell managed the freight schedules, negotiated with union representatives, and navigated the brutal logistics of international shipping. Mitchell viewed the company as his legacy. Discovering that his partner siphoned the operating budget to fund European shopping sprees and luxury wellness retreats generated a cold, unyielding fury within him. Thomas entered the boardroom at exactly 9 o'clock. He wore his finest tailored suit, projecting a manufactured aura of supreme confidence. He carried a leather portfolio and took his seat at the head of the mahogany table, attempting to dominate the physical space. He did not know I was standing in the corridor. He assumed the meeting would remain a private, internal dispute between two founding partners. He called the meeting to order. Through the tempered glass, I watched him open his portfolio and launch into a rehearsed, aggressive monologue. He cited declining profit margins and supply chain inefficiencies. He utilized a barrage of corporate buzzwords, speaking of redundant leadership, required streamlining, and the necessity of singular executive vision. He was laying the rhetorical groundwork to demand a vote of no confidence against Mitchell. He calculated that if he could force Mitchell out of the company before the audit became public knowledge, he could seal the financial records and bury his embezzlement forever. It was a bold, desperate maneuver, entirely reliant on Mitchell remaining defensive and uninformed. I placed my hand on the stainless steel door handle. I pressed downward and stepped into the boardroom. Sarah followed one pace behind me, carrying the bound black folder containing the final compliance report. The rhythm of my father's speech faltered the moment he saw me. He stopped mid-sentence, his jaw tightened, and a flash of genuine panic registered in his eyes. He assumed his parking garage extortion attempt successfully intimidated me into silence. Seeing me walk into his corporate sanctuary shattered that delusion. He attempted to salvage his authority. He stood up, pointing a finger toward the door, and demanded that unauthorized personnel vacate the premises immediately. He stated that this was a closed executive session. Mitchell remained seated. He folded his hands and rested them on the polished wood. Mitchell informed his partner that the session was not closed. He explained that as a 50% equity shareholder, he possessed the legal right to invite external compliance officers to present their findings regarding internal fiscal irregularities. I took a seat opposite my father. I placed the black folder on the table. I did not speak. My presence alone served as a psychological anchor, a physical reminder that his crimes were fully documented and verified by a third-party authority. Thomas realized the hostile takeover was failing. He pivoted back to his primary survival tactic. He leaned forward, bracing his hands on the table, and adopted a tone of righteous indignation. He accused Mitchell of orchestrating a witch hunt. He claimed the audit was a fabricated weapon designed to force him out of his own company. He turned his glare toward me, his eyes narrowing into slits, silently reminding me of the threat he issued on Friday night. He believed the threat of elder abuse allegations still provided him a protective shield. Mitchell did not argue with the accusations. He did not match my father's elevated volume. Mitchell simply reached into his suit jacket and produced a slim digital tablet. He placed the device in the center of the mahogany table. "We are not going to debate the audit, Thomas," Mitchell stated, his voice carrying the heavy, exhausted weight of a man dealing with a traitor. "The numbers are verified. You stole from this company to fund your wife's vanity and your daughter's apartment. But that is not why I am forcing your resignation today. I am forcing your resignation because of how you responded to getting caught." Mitchell tapped the screen of the tablet. The audio file began to play. The high-fidelity speakers of the device captured the distinct acoustic signature of the subterranean parking garage. The hum of the ventilation system provided a low, steady background noise. Then, my father's voice filled the quiet boardroom. The recording was pristine. Every desperate, venomous word echoed off the glass walls. The executives sitting at the table heard Thomas explicitly threaten to submit a false report to the state licensing board. They heard him outline his fabricated narrative of elder financial abuse. They listened to him attempt to blackmail a federal compliance officer, demanding the alteration of a corporate document to cover his embezzlement. Thomas froze. The manufactured confidence drained from his posture, leaving him looking hollow and fragile. He stared at the digital tablet as if it were an explosive device. He realized in that exact moment that his extortion strategy was not a shield, it was a snare. By attempting to blackmail me, he handed his business partner documented proof of a felony offense. The audio file concluded. The silence that followed was dense and suffocating. Mitchell reached into his leather briefcase. He extracted a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy bond paper. He slid the stack across the smooth surface of the table until it rested directly in front of my father. That is a formal divestment agreement, Mitchell explained. It outlines the immediate relinquishment of your 50% equity stake in Horizon Global Logistics. It revokes your voting rights, terminates your executive salary, and severs all ties between you and this corporate entity. The buyout price is set at $1 nominal. Thomas stared at the paperwork. He opened his mouth, attempting to formulate a defense, attempting to negotiate a severance package or a gradual exit strategy. Mitchell cut him off before he could form a single syllable. "You do not have leverage, Thomas," Mitchell warned, his tone dropping an octave. "If you refuse to sign that instrument right now, I will place a call to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I will hand them the forensic audit proving corporate wire fraud, and I will hand them the audio recording proving felony extortion. You will leave this building in handcuffs. Sign the paper." The ultimatum offered no alternative routes. It was a luxury accessory he purchased years ago to project an image of effortless success. Now, it served as the tool of his professional execution. He uncapped the pen. He leaned over the divestment contract. The physical toll of his defeat manifested in his hands. His fingers trembled so severely he could barely grip the polished metal barrel. He pressed the gold nib against the signature line on the final page of the document. The room was so quiet that the sound of the pen moving across the heavy paper seemed amplified. It was a harsh, erratic scratching noise. The ink smeared slightly as his shaking hand struggled to form the letters of his own name. He completed the signature, pushing the document back across the table with a sudden, jerky motion. He did not look at Mitchell. He did not look at me. The Vanguard Sterling funds were frozen, their country club access was revoked, the estate faced imminent foreclosure, and the primary source of their operational revenue was permanently severed. They were exiled to the reality they spent 3 decades trying to escape. However, the destruction of the parental hierarchy merely shifted the pressure onto the remaining sibling. Chloe sat in her Tribeca loft, surrounded by the debris of her failed influencer career and her terminated engagement. Penniless, dumped, and facing the impending consequences of her stolen heirloom, she refused to accept her newfound irrelevance. She required an audience to validate her existence, and she required a villain to blame for her sudden poverty. Barred from the venture capital world and cut off from her family allowance, she decided to weaponize the only platform she had left. She prepared to pivot her digital brand, turning her attention toward the internet to monetize her victimhood, entirely unaware that her luxury apartment was owned by the exact woman she was preparing to attack. When the external validation that sustains an influencer evaporates, the resulting silence is deafening. Chloe sat in the center of her Tribeca loft on a Tuesday afternoon. The space around her was a monument to her former status. Exposed brick walls, imported Italian leather furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city streets formed her carefully curated sanctuary. Yet, the environment offered zero comfort. Her wellness startup was dead. Her engagement to Harrison was terminated. The municipal detectives possessed the stolen sapphire. The venture capital doors were permanently locked. Stripped of her wealth and her prospective husband, my sister faced a terrifying descent into irrelevance. She required an audience to process her reality. More importantly, she needed a villain to shoulder the blame for her sudden misfortune. She retrieved a ring light from her storage closet. She positioned the tripod in front of a neutral, unadorned wall, ensuring the background conveyed a sense of stark vulnerability. She discarded her designer silk wardrobe in favor of an oversized faded gray sweater. She stripped away her pristine makeup, utilizing a damp towel to create the illusion of recent, exhaustive crying. She prepared to perform the role of a lifetime. She decided to monetize her downfall. Chloe pressed record on her smartphone. She stared into the camera lens and delivered a breathless, trembling monologue. She did not attempt to sell botanical serums or promote luxury retreats. She rebranded herself on the spot. She adopted the persona of a victimized survivor. She spun a convoluted narrative about systemic familial sabotage. She claimed her promising wellness brand and her beautiful relationship were destroyed by a vindictive corporate executive sibling. She painted a picture of a jealous sister who utilized dark financial manipulation to hack her bank accounts, steal her assets, and ruin her reputation out of pure, unadulterated spite. She used phrases like corporate family abuse and financial isolation. She avoided using my specific name to skirt direct libel algorithms, but she provided enough contextual breadcrumbs for her audience to connect the dots. She ended the video with a single, perfectly timed tear rolling down her cheek, begging her followers to share her story and expose the toxic elite. She uploaded the content to her primary digital platforms. The algorithms, primed to reward trauma and scandal, amplified the video immediately. Within 3 hours, the post accrued tens of thousands of views. A sympathetic comment section blossomed, filled with strangers offering digital condolences and condemning the unnamed corporate monster who ruined her life. Chloe felt a rush of euphoric relief. She believed she had reclaimed the narrative. She assumed she had engineered a public relations nightmare that would force me to retreat and negotiate. Her strategy was inherently flawed. She relied on the same emotional currency she utilized our entire childhood. When Chloe was 19 years old, she failed 2 semesters of university coursework. Instead of facing academic probation, she sat in the dean's office and wept, claiming her professors harbored a personal vendetta against her. Thomas donated a new wing to the campus library, and the failing grades were quietly expunged. Tears always served as her get-out-of-jail-free card. The digital ecosystem, however, is not a sympathetic university dean. It is a highly regulated corporate environment bound by strict terms of service. My cybersecurity team flagged the viral video just before the lunch hour. They forwarded the link to my secure terminal. I watched my sister perform her fabricated trauma. I did not feel a spike in blood pressure. I did not log into a secondary account to argue with teenagers in her comments section. Engaging in a digital shouting match provides the opponent with oxygen and validity. I prefer to remove the atmosphere entirely. I summoned Elena, my lead corporate counsel. I turned my monitor outward so she could view the footage. Elena analyzed the video with the detached scrutiny of a predator studying a compromised target. She noted the specific allegations of financial hacking and asset theft. Even without a direct name, the identifying details breached the threshold for targeted harassment and defamation of a corporate officer. I instructed Elena to execute a digital purge. Elena did not send a cease and desist letter to Chloe. She bypassed the creator and went directly to the host. She contacted the legal department of the social media platform. She submitted a comprehensive takedown notice. The dossier included the active police report regarding the stolen sapphire, proving Chloe was the subject of a criminal inquiry, not the victim of a corporate conspiracy. She cited the platform's strict guidelines regarding cyberbullying, the spread of unverified financial allegations, and the monetization of defamatory content. The platform administrators reviewed the legal documentation. They faced a choice between protecting an influencer with a modest following or inviting a civil liability lawsuit from a major forensic accounting firm. The decision was purely mathematical. At 4 p.m, Chloe refreshed her application to check her engagement metrics. The screen flashed a gray error code. Her viral video was gone. She navigated to her main profile page. A sterile, automated banner informed her that her account was suspended indefinitely for severe violations of the community guidelines regarding harassment and fraudulent claims. Her digital voice was silenced. Her audience was erased. She was cut off from the only platform that provided her with a sense of identity. She threw her phone onto the Italian leather sofa, screaming into the empty loft. She paced the hardwood floors, her mind racing for an alternative strategy. She still possessed the physical reality of her luxury apartment. She convinced herself that as long as she held the keys to the Tribeca loft, she retained a foothold in the elite world. She planned to regroup, host a gathering of her remaining high society acquaintances, and rebuild her network offline. She remained entirely blind to the true ownership of the ground beneath her feet. 3 years ago, my wealth management portfolio required diversification. Real estate in Lower Manhattan presented a stable, high-yield asset class. I directed the Vanguard Sterling Group to acquire a holding company that possessed a portfolio of premium residential units. One of those specific units was the sprawling loft currently occupied by my sister. When Thomas agreed to subsidize Chloe's metropolitan lifestyle, he instructed his accountant to set up a recurring wire transfer to the property management portal. He believed he was paying a faceless corporate landlord. He never looked past the routing numbers. He spent 3 years depositing his logistics revenue directly into my holding company. When I froze the Vanguard Sterling accounts and terminated my father's financial lifeline, the rent payments for the Tribeca loft ceased immediately. I opened the real estate management ledger on my secure server. The accounting software displayed a bright red deficit next to Chloe's residential file. The monthly lease was $6,000. With Thomas cut off, the account showed 3 consecutive missed payments. The total arrears stood at $18,000. In the state of New York, a delinquency of that magnitude triggers the legal right to execute an expedited eviction protocol. I did not send a friendly reminder. I did not offer a grace period or a negotiated payment plan. I contacted the designated property manager and authorized the immediate delivery of a formal notice to vacate. The execution of the directive occurred the following morning. Chloe was sitting at her kitchen island, staring at her suspended social media accounts on her laptop. The quiet hum of her refrigerator was the only sound in the apartment. Heavy, authoritative footsteps echoed down the exterior hallway. They stopped directly outside her door. A loud, reverberating thud struck the heavy mahogany wood. It was not a polite knock. It was the sound of a fist demanding attention. Chloe jumped, her heart hammering against her ribs. She walked slowly to the entryway and peered through the brass peephole. A process server stood in the corridor. He wore a plain gray jacket and held a clipboard. He did not wait for her to open the door. He unrolled a thick strip of heavy-duty adhesive tape. Through the thick wood, Chloe heard the sharp, tearing sound of the tape. The process server flattened a bright yellow legal document directly onto the center of her door. He pressed his hand firmly against the paper, ensuring it adhered to the polished mahogany. He snapped a photograph of the affixed document with his mobile device to prove legal service, turned around, and walked toward the elevator. Chloe unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The bright yellow paper fluttered slightly in the draft. The bold black text at the top of the page was impossible to misinterpret. 30-day notice of eviction. Demand for surrender of premises. She looked down the hallway. The noise had attracted the attention of her affluent neighbors. An investment banker from the unit across the hall stood in his doorway, holding a cup of coffee. He stared at the yellow notice, his expression shifting from curiosity to distinct patrician disgust. The scarlet letter of poverty was now permanently attached to her residence. Chloe peeled the paper off the wood. Her hands trembled so intensely she nearly tore the document. She retreated into the apartment and locked the door. She read the itemized breakdown of the $18,000 in unpaid back rent. She read the name of the holding company demanding the funds. A quick, desperate internet search of the corporate registry revealed the managing director of the subsidiary, Helen Stephen. The final illusion shattered. The sanctuary she believed she commanded was merely a cage I owned. I controlled the digital network that silenced her, and I owned the physical roof over her head. The invisible safety net was gone, replaced by a concrete floor. Penniless, digitally erased, facing criminal charges for the stolen sapphire, and legally evicted, Chloe possessed nowhere to hide. Her Tribeca residency was terminating. She packed a single designer suitcase with trembling hands. She had no alternative but to retreat to the only place that might still harbor her. She boarded a commuter train back to Greenwich. She returned to an estate facing its own imminent foreclosure, inhabited by a father stripped of his company and a mother stripped of her social standing. The convergence of their mutual ruin under one roof created a critical mass of despair. They realized the fortress of their family dynasty was reduced to rubble. With their wealth, reputation, and pride entirely dismantled, they faced a stark, undeniable truth. The only entity capable of providing salvation was the daughter they discarded. The realization pushed Victoria to abandon the last remaining shred of her dignity, setting the stage for a final, desperate pilgrimage to my front gate. The Greenwich estate transformed into a pressure cooker of failure by Thursday evening. Thomas returned from his corporate execution stripped of his equity, carrying nothing but the clothes he wore. Hours later, a commuter train deposited Chloe at the local station. She paid a taxi fare with the last remaining funds in her checking account and dragged a single designer suitcase up the long stone driveway. She possessed no Tribeca loft, no venture capital, and an impending criminal summons for a stolen heirloom. 3 individuals accustomed to limitless privilege were suddenly confined under one roof, facing imminent foreclosure. Victoria surveyed the wreckage of her dynasty. Her husband was a disgraced, unemployed liability. Her golden child was a destitute pariah. Victoria operated on a survival instinct refined by decades of social climbing. She required a solvent host to maintain her standard of living. She calculated that my financial stability represented her only remaining sanctuary. She constructed a desperate psychological strategy. She assumed that underneath my corporate armor, the 15-year-old girl she exiled to boarding school still craved maternal validation. She believed she could trade fabricated affection for a residential suite and a reinstated credit line. A severe coastal weather system moved across the Northeast that night. The storm brought driving rain and plummeting temperatures. Victoria did not wait for the weather to clear. She navigated her leased vehicle through the torrential downpour toward my private residential enclave. My community utilizes a highly restricted security infrastructure. A gated perimeter, manned checkpoints, and biometric access protocols ensure profound privacy. Victoria arrived at the primary steel gate just past 9 o'clock. The rain lashed against the windshield of her car. She realized the manned security booth would not grant her vehicular access without my explicit authorization. She stepped out of her vehicle into the freezing downpour. She abandoned her umbrella, deliberately exposing herself to the elements to amplify her visual vulnerability. She approached the stainless steel call panel mounted on the stone pillar and pressed the intercom button. I stood in the center of my kitchen. The environment radiated warmth and quiet security. Amber pendant lights illuminated the quartz island. Lucas sat on a leather bar stool, reviewing a structural schematic, his presence offering a steady, grounding anchor. The aroma of steeped Earl Grey tea filled the room. The dedicated security tablet mounted on the wall emitted a sharp, dual-tone chime. I approached the screen. The high-definition night vision camera transmitted a clear, stark image. Victoria stood shivering in the torrential rain. Her tailored trench coat was soaked, clinging to her fragile frame. She looked directly upward into the lens, her face illuminated by the harsh white glow of the security floodlights. The system activated the two-way audio link. The microphone captured the heavy rhythm of the rain striking the pavement. Helen, her voice crackled through the speaker, carrying a high, desperate pitch. "It is your mother. Please, darling, you have to let me in. They are taking the house. Your father is a monster. He ruined everything. I see it all so clearly now." I listened to her weave this new fiction. She attempted to cast Thomas as the sole architect of their ruin, conveniently omitting her own decades of systemic entitlement and emotional neglect. She offered the maternal devotion I spent my entire youth desperately trying to earn. 2 decades ago, hearing her refer to me as her darling would have commanded my unwavering loyalty. I would have opened the gate, handed her a towel, and absorbed her financial burdens to secure her elusive love. That child no longer existed. Standing in my kitchen, analyzing the audio feed, I felt no residual longing. I experienced no painful emotional conflict. I looked at the woman on the screen, and recognized pure, transactional parasitism. She did not want a daughter. She wanted a landlord. She wanted a bank. I tapped the microphone icon on the tablet to engage my audio output. The connection snapped open. "You are trespassing on private property, Victoria," I stated. My voice carried an even, clinical cadence, devoid of malice or sympathy. "The temperature is dropping. I suggest you return to your vehicle before you catch a chill." She gripped the edges of the stainless steel call box. Her knuckles turned white. "Helen, please," she sobbed. The sound was ragged and theatrical. "I have nowhere else to go. My friends abandoned me." "We can start over. We can be a real family. Just open the gate. I will do whatever you ask. I am your mother. You are my child." I rested my hand against the warm quartz countertop. I let her pleas hang in the digital connection for 3 seconds before delivering the final accounting. "You made a public declaration regarding your lineage last month," I reminded her. "You stood on a stage at the Grand Astor Hotel, bathed in chandelier light, holding a glass of champagne. You looked at 200 of your esteemed peers and introduced Chloe as your beautiful only child." Victoria opened her mouth, but the words withered in her throat. The memory of her own calculated cruelty became the exact instrument of her current exile. "I operate on the data you provided," I continued. "You only have one child, Victoria, and that child just arrived at your estate carrying a single suitcase. She has no income, no engagement, and no housing. Your only child requires your immediate attention. I cannot help you." I watched the monitor. Victoria remained frozen. The torrential rain battered her shoulders and plastered her hair against her skull. The water mixed with her expensive cosmetic products. Thick, dark streaks of mascara ran down her pale cheeks, mimicking the appearance of jagged scars. She stared upward, her eyes wide with the horrifying realization that her manipulation possessed zero currency. She fixed her gaze on the unblinking red recording light of the security camera, finally understanding that the steel gate separating us would never open. I tapped the security command interface. I instructed the overnight guard stationed at the gatehouse to formally deny entry and register the vehicle license plate on the permanent blacklist. I pressed the red disconnect icon. The audio feed terminated. The monitor faded to a muted, dark gray standby screen. I turned away from the wall and picked up my mug of tea. The interpersonal war concluded the moment the screen went black. I severed the final psychological tether to the Stephen dynasty. However, the legal and financial mechanisms I set into motion weeks prior operated independent of my feelings. While my parents sat trapped inside their decaying Greenwich mansion, the institutional consequences of their fraud were preparing to breach their front door. The Internal Revenue Service possessed the corporate audit, and the regional bank initiated the property reclamation process. The illusion of their wealth was already dismantled, but the physical reality of their poverty was scheduled to arrive at dawn. 6 months passed. October arrived with a chilling breeze off the Atlantic Ocean, sweeping the summer heat out of the city. The immediate chaos of my family experiencing financial collapse settled into a permanent, grinding routine. The American justice system operates with a slow, grinding friction, but the mathematics of poverty materialize overnight. The Greenwich estate formally entered foreclosure in late May. The bank seized the property, auctioned the imported furniture, and changed the heavy brass locks. My biological relatives were forced to relocate, discovering the harsh gravity of a society that offers zero grace to those devoid of capital. The local business sector acknowledged the shift with characteristic sanitized brevity. I sat in my office drinking black coffee and reading the October edition of the Connecticut Commerce Journal. Buried on page 14, a small paragraph detailed the executive changes at Horizon Global Logistics. The brief article noted that Thomas Stephen departed the firm to pursue private endeavors. It was a polite, sanitized translation. It obscured the reality of a hostile ousting designed to prevent a federal wire fraud indictment. The corporate world protects its own optical integrity by erasing the disgraced in silence. However, the Internal Revenue Service does not deal in polite translations or sanitized optics. Following the forensic audit, federal tax investigators scrutinized his misclassified expenses. They identified the stolen funds he used to subsidize luxury vacations and designer wardrobes. To avoid a custodial prison sentence for tax evasion, Thomas agreed to a punitive restitution schedule. He owed the government a staggering sum in back taxes and accrued penalties. He required immediate, verifiable income. At 62 years old, stripped of his professional network and bearing a toxic reputation, his employment options vanished. The man who spent 3 decades sitting in ergonomic leather chairs negotiating freight contracts now wears a brown polyester uniform. He secured a position driving a commercial delivery step van for a regional logistics carrier. He spends 10 hours a day navigating the exact same affluent neighborhoods he used to rule. He hauls heavy cardboard boxes up long, winding driveways, leaving packages at the front doors of his former golf partners. The physical toll of manual labor on an aging frame is unforgiving. His joints ache, his tailored posture is permanently hunched, and his pride is systematically dismantled with every package he scans. Victoria experienced a parallel descent into the working class. The foreclosure eradicated her social standing. Her peers from the charity boards and the country club excised her from their contact lists with surgical precision. High society operates like an immune system, swiftly rejecting any organism infected by public scandal. Left with 0 marketable skills and facing mounting legal bills, she applied for administrative positions. She currently works as a front desk receptionist at a bustling pediatric dental clinic in Stamford. The woman who once dictated seating arrangements for elite summer galas now spends her mornings verifying insurance copays and scheduling teeth cleanings. She sits behind a sliding glass window wearing generic medical scrubs. The environment smells of sterile latex gloves and artificial bubblegum fluoride. One Tuesday afternoon, the consequences of her new reality materialized in sharp, agonizing focus. The glass entry door of the clinic chimed. Victoria looked up from her computer monitor. A woman walked into the waiting room holding the hand of a young child. Victoria recognized the woman instantly. It was a prominent real estate broker she used to play doubles tennis with at Oak Ridge. A cold, paralyzing terror gripped my mother. The instinct to offer a bright, curated greeting warred with the crushing humiliation of her current station. Victoria could not face the judgment. She could not endure the pitying stare of a former peer viewing her in a polyester uniform. She grabbed a thick stack of manila patient files resting on the counter. She raised the heavy folders, obscuring her face entirely, and turned her body toward the filing cabinets. She pretended to search for a misplaced document, holding her breath, listening to the former tennis partner check in with the other receptionist. Victoria remained frozen behind the paper shield until the dental hygienist finally called the woman and her child back to the examination room. It was a silent, suffocating indignity she now endured on a weekly basis. Chloe shared this unforgiving new ecosystem. She avoided a felony conviction regarding the stolen sapphire by accepting a harsh plea agreement. The prosecutors reduced the charge to misdemeanor possession of stolen property in exchange for steep fines, mandatory community service, and a prolonged probationary period. The legal fees drained whatever meager savings she possessed. Her digital footprint remained permanently erased. The venture capital world blacklisted her corporate entity. Stripped of her influencer status and her wealthy fiancé, Chloe sought employment in the only sector that would hire someone with her specific background. She works at a cosmetics counter inside a mid-tier suburban department store. She stands on her feet under buzzing fluorescent lighting for 8 hours a shift. She applies sample foundation and demonstrates overpriced lipsticks for hurried customers who treat her with the exact same invisible indifference she used to project onto service workers. Her smartphone, once a constant source of dopamine and external validation, sits silent in her locker. She receives no brand deals, no invitations to exclusive rooftop parties, and no messages from the tech executives she tried to manipulate. The curated aesthetic she prioritized over human connection dissolved, leaving her trapped in the mundane retail grind she always believed she was too important to endure. At the end of their respective shifts, these three disgraced individuals returned to the same physical space. They lease a cramped second-floor, two-bedroom apartment in a noisy, congested industrial sector of the city. The rent consumes the vast majority of their combined wages. The walls are thin, transmitting the sounds of traffic and neighboring arguments. They live on top of one another. The claustrophobia of their shared failure breeds constant, bitter friction. Thomas sleeps on a convertible sofa in the narrow living room. Victoria and Chloe share the two small bedrooms. They possess no space to hide from each other. Every time they pass in the tiny galley kitchen, they are forced to look at the living embodiment of their ruined dynasty. They suffocate in a reality they actively earned. There is no cartoonish vengeance, no dramatic explosion. There is only the cold, unyielding gravity of the American economic system when unearned privilege is permanently revoked. I observed this resolution from a vast, comfortable distance. The final quarterly report from the Vanguard Sterling Group landed on my desk. The ledgers reflected a permanent zero balance across all accounts linked to my former relatives. The holding company was officially dissolved, the capital successfully reallocated into secure, high-yield municipal bonds. I closed the digital file and archived the folder into the encrypted server. The ghost of the Stephen family completed its designated task. I turned my attention away from the wreckage of the past and focused on the quiet, unbothered peace awaiting me in the future. The Vanguard Sterling Holding Company still held a fraction of residual capital following the termination of my parents' residential retainers. I initiated the final liquidation protocol on a crisp Tuesday morning in early November. I sat at my glass desk in the financial district and watched the progress bar on my encrypted monitor trace a steady green line across the screen. The funds previously allocated for exorbitant country club dues, imported luxury vehicles, and Tribeca loft rentals were systematically recalled and consolidated into a single master account. The holding company was legally dissolved by noon. The digital statement displayed a final balance of $0.00. The financial ghost that haunted and funded my biological family was permanently laid to rest. My grandmother Beatrice understood the mechanics of independence better than anyone in my lineage. I decided her legacy required a formal, enduring institution rather than a forgotten memory. I drafted the charter for the Beatrice Endowment for Financial Literacy. I seeded the trust with the liquidated capital from the defunct holding company, establishing a permanent, annual $100,000 scholarship. The criteria for the award were rigid and entirely objective. The funds were exclusively available to young women pursuing advanced degrees in forensic accounting, corporate compliance, and risk management. I structured the disbursement to cover tuition, campus housing, and professional licensure exam fees. I ensured the recipients would never need to rely on the conditional generosity of a toxic benefactor. I wanted to fund individuals who relied on data and hard work, standing in direct opposition to the fabricated influencer lifestyle my sister attempted to build. 6 months after the endowment launched, I received a handwritten letter forwarded by the University Financial Aid Office. The ink pressed deeply into the thick, textured paper. The sender was a first-generation college student named Maria from a working-class neighborhood in Queens. She detailed the predatory loan structures her family navigated for years. She explained how the grant allowed her to quit her overnight retail shifts and focus entirely on her advanced taxation seminars. I read the letter sitting in my quiet home office. I framed the heavy parchment and hung it on the wall adjacent to my desk. It served as a daily visual reminder that capital is only as valuable as the concrete reality it builds. With my professional and philanthropic structures secured, I turned my attention toward my personal architecture. Lucas and I did not desire a public spectacle for our wedding. We possessed zero interest in renting a gilded Manhattan ballroom or hiring a string quartet to impress a room full of indifferent, opportunistic acquaintances. We saw We selected a private coastal estate sitting at the edge of a rocky promontory in Maine for the ceremony. The geography there is uncompromising and authentic. Sharp granite cliffs meet the dark, churning waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The landscape is stripped of all superficial pretense, offering only the raw, undeniable force of nature. We invited exactly 20 individuals. The guest list consisted of my closest corporate partners, the immediate relatives Lucas cherished from Michigan, and the select friends who proved their loyalty through years of quiet consistency. There were no prominent state senators or hospital board directors in attendance. No one. The atmosphere smelled of pine needles, salt spray, and wood smoke from the outdoor fire pits. We held the ceremony an hour before dusk in early October. The sky painted itself in bruised shades of violet and deep orange. The wind carried a sharp chill, prompting our guests to wrap themselves in the heavy woolen blankets we provided on the wooden benches. I wore a simple, tailored ivory silk dress that favored structural elegance over excessive embellishment. Lucas wore a dark charcoal suit. He stood at the edge of the cliff, the ocean stretching out endlessly behind him. He looked at me with the steady, unshakable certainty that defined our entire history together. He did not offer a rehearsed theatrical performance. We exchanged vows that we wrote ourselves, focusing on mutual respect, enduring partnership, and the shared responsibility of protecting our peace. The officiant, a retired judge and longtime legal mentor of mine, pronounced us married as the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the coastline in a soft twilight glow. Following the ceremony, we retreated to the warmth of the main lodge to formalize the union. The interior featured exposed timber beams and a roaring stone fireplace that crackled in the quiet room. The officiant laid the marriage certificate flat on a heavy oak table. He handed me a simple black pen. I stared at the designated signature line. For 34 years, I carried the surname Stephen. It was a title associated with conditional affection, performative wealth, and systemic deception. It was a label tying me to a family that erased my existence the moment I proved inconvenient to their aesthetic. It was a name that demanded my silence and my capital, while offering nothing but isolation in return. I pressed the pen against the thick paper. I did not hesitate. The ink flowed smoothly, filling the stark white space. I signed my first name and seamlessly attached my new surname, Helen Bennett. I set the pen down on the oak table. A genuine, relaxed smile formed on my face, reaching my eyes for the first time in recent memory. The physical act of signing that document severed the final legal and historical tether to my past. The Stephen lineage ended for me in that room. I was no longer the forgotten daughter waiting in the shadows. People often romanticize the concept of blood relations. Society conditions us to believe that shared genetics mandate endless forgiveness and perpetual sacrifice. We are taught to endure disrespect, financial parasitism, and emotional neglect simply because the perpetrators share our physical traits. This is a manufactured vulnerability. It is a social contract designed to keep victims trapped in the orbit of their abusers. My parents and my sister utilized the concept of family as a weapon. They demanded loyalty while offering exploitation. I spent the first 2 decades of my life waiting for an invitation to a table where I was never truly welcome. I learned the hard way that you cannot earn the respect of individuals who are committed to misunderstanding your value. You cannot cure their narcissism with your generosity. When you function as the foundation holding up their false reality, they do not thank you for your strength. They simply demand you carry more weight so they can build a taller tower. Setting a firm boundary is often misinterpreted as an act of hostility by those who benefit from your lack of boundaries. Burning a bridge feels destructive until you realize the bridge only served as a toll road for people who never intended to pay the fee. I stood by the stone fireplace, holding a glass of warm, spiced cider, listening to the genuine laughter of my chosen family echoing through the lodge. Lucas walked over and rested his hand on the small of my back. The weight of his touch was grounding and real. I looked out the large glass window into the dark coastal night. I did not feel a lingering sense of loss or unresolved anger toward the people sitting in a cramped apartment back in Connecticut. The ledger was permanently balanced. The accounts were settled. The ghost of my former family was gone, leaving behind a woman who finally owned her own life. We are conditioned from childhood to believe that blood is an absolute mandate, a permanent contract that requires us to endure endless disrespect under the guise of family loyalty. But the profound truth revealed in this narrative is that you cannot buy genuine affection, and you cannot cure narcissism with your endless generosity. When you spend your life functioning as the invisible concrete foundation for someone else's towering ego, they will never thank you for holding them up. They will only resent you the moment you decide to shift your weight. Setting a firm boundary is rarely interpreted as an act of self-care by those who have spent decades benefiting from your lack of one. To them, your sudden self-respect feels like an unprovoked attack. Yet the ultimate act of self-love is realizing that burning a bridge is not a tragedy when that bridge only served as a toll road for people who never intended to pay the fee. You are allowed to close the ledger. You are allowed to walk away from a table where your presence is only valued when you are picking up the check. If you have spent years shrinking your own existence to fit into a family portrait that erased you anyway, it is time to step out of the frame entirely. Thank you for spending your time with Sophia Told Stories today. If you have ever been the ghost in your own family, or if you are currently gathering the courage to finally cut the emotional or financial cord, drop a comment below and share your truth. Subscribe and join our community of people choosing their own peace. As you close this video and look around your own quiet room, ask yourself a simple question. Are the people in your life holding your hand, or are they just checking your pulse to see how much more they can draw? Sometimes the most terrifying realization isn't that you are finally alone, but that you always were, and now, for the very first time, the silence actually belongs to you.